The prairie night stretched wide as an ocean, the wind carrying whispers of dust and sorrow across the land. Nokomis walked barefoot over the hardened earth, her thin dress clinging to her legs, her arms cradling two tiny bundles wrapped in a faded blanket. The twins stirred against her chest, their soft cries breaking the silence of the plains. She tried to hush them with a lullaby her grandmother had once sung, but her voice cracked, heavy with grief. Her husband lay buried only a month, and already his family had turned her from the house, as if she were a shadow that did not belong. The stars above glittered coldly, as though they had watched this kind of cruelty too many times to intervene. Yet in her heart she pleaded to those same stars, "Tell me where I may rest tonight. Tell me if I still belong in this world at all." Her path led her into the small town that smelled of horse leather and chimney smoke. The sheriff's office lantern burned dimly against the darkness, and she stood outside for a long moment, clutching the babies to her chest. When she finally knocked, the door creaked open and Sheriff Clayton filled the frame, a tall man with eyes like iron. She begged softly, "Please, just for one night. My daughters are cold." But the sheriff's face did not soften. He shook his head, muttering something about not wanting trouble, about how a woman like her should go back where she belonged. The door closed in her face, and the silence afterward was heavier than the night itself. She leaned against the wooden post, trembling, shame tightening around her throat. The twins began to cry again, their tiny hands reaching into the darkness as if searching for a father they would never know. Nokomis whispered their names, rocking them, her tears falling onto their cheeks. She thought of walking until her legs gave way, of curling in the grass and letting the earth swallow her. But then footsteps approached, measured, unhurried, boots pressing gravel into the street. A figure emerged from the shadows. A broad-shouldered cowboy, hat pulled low, the glow of his lantern casting warm light across a rugged face. Magnus Cole, though she did not yet know his name. His gaze traveled from the sheriff's door to the woman clutching her children. Something in the set of his jaw suggested he had seen enough cruelty for one lifetime. The wind tugged at his long coat as he spoke in a voice that carried like low thunder, yet was strangely gentle. "My home is yours." The words stunned her more than the cold had. She pulled the twins closer, uncertain if she had heard right. I don't know you," she whispered, fear and shame tangled in her throat. He lowered the lantern, so its light glowed around them, softening the shadows. His eyes, gray-blue like the morning sky before a storm, did not waver. "You don't need to know me tonight. Just know you won't be turned away." His tone carried no hunger, no pity, only steadiness, like a bridge held strong over a river. She hesitated, her heart pounding, but the cries of her children pressed her forward. She followed him into the night, each step an act of faith she could barely name. The ranch house loomed against the horizon, timbered and tall, smelling faintly of cedar when he opened the door. Inside, the hearth glowed with dying embers. He set about reviving the fire, coaxing sparks into warmth, while she stood uncertain in the doorway, rocking her daughters. When he offered her a chair near the flames, she sat with a sigh that seemed to leave half her grief on the floorboards. He brought milk for the babies, tea for her, and thick quilts that smelled of the sun. She whispered her thanks, though her eyes kept flicking to the door, half expecting him to turn cruel as others had. But he only sat across from her, gaze steady, saying, "Rest. You're safe here." That night, Nokomis lay beside her daughters in the warmth of borrowed quilts. Sleep hovered at the edges, but mistrust, shaped by too many betrayals, held her wakeful. Why would a man of wealth, with a fine home and land, risk his name for her, a widow, a native woman cast out by her kin? The fire crackled. Magnus rose once to tend it, his movements quiet, almost reverent. She closed her eyes at last, letting the sound of flames be her lullaby, wondering what dawn might bring. The dawn did not bring peace. When she stepped into town beside Magnus to buy supplies, whispers rose like snakes in the grass. "That's her, the widow thrown out. Already in another man's house?" The words stung, shame burning across her face. Sheriff Clayton eyed them coldly from across the street. When Magnus hitched his horse, the sheriff strode over, speaking low but sharp. "You'll ruin your name, Cole, taking in a woman like her. Folks won't trade with you. Best send her on her way." Magnus said nothing. He only placed a hand on the wagon rail near where Nokomis stood, his body a quiet wall between her and the sheriff. His silence cut sharper than words, and after a long moment, Clayton spat in the dust and walked away. Nokomis kept her eyes lowered, her heart thrashing with guilt. She wanted to apologize, to say she would leave before she destroyed him too. But when she dared glance at Magnus, his face was calm, as though her presence was not a burden but a choice he had already made. That calmness planted the first seed of something she could not yet name. In the weeks that followed, she began to find rhythm in the ranch life. The land was vast, rolling fields that smelled of sage after rain. She took to planting a small garden behind the house, beans, corn, and wildflowers she gathered from the plains. Each seed she pressed into the soil felt like a prayer for her daughters, for herself, for the possibility that roots might grow here. Magnus often joined her, his large hands breaking the ground with surprising gentleness. They worked mostly in silence, the kind that felt unspoken but companionable. One evening, she plucked a handful of wildflowers, arranging them in a tin cup, and placed them by his bedside when he wasn't looking. The next morning, she saw the cup still there, untouched, but with a faint smile in his eyes that told her he had noticed. Yet kindness drew attention. Some neighbors stopped trading with her, muttering that she had bewitched Magnus. One merchant insulted her outright at the market, and before she could shrink away, Magnus' voice cut through the stall like steel. "You'll treat her with respect," he said, steady and low. The merchant faltered under his gaze, grumbling but silent. That night, Nokomis wept in the kitchen, confessing that she should leave before his good name was ruined. Magnus listened quietly, then stepped outside and returned with a single wildflower from her garden. He pressed it into her hand. "What grows here is yours as much as mine." The flower trembled in her palm, and so did her heart. Her daughters began to laugh again, their small giggles carrying through the house like bells. One afternoon, she watched as Magnus lifted them high into the air, his laughter joining theirs, his eyes bright with a tenderness she had never thought to see. For the first time, she looked at him not as a savior, but as a man carrying his own solitude. That night, she prepared a meal with herbs and care, setting the table with an attention she had not given to anything since her husband's passing. When he sat down, surprised, their eyes met, and the silence between them deepened, charged with an unspoken current. No words of love passed, but the air felt heavy with something close to it, something waiting. It broke when Sheriff Clayton returned. One evening, he arrived with 2 deputies, his voice carrying through the ranch yard as townsfolk gathered to watch. "She has no claim here. She's not your wife, Cole. She's no better than a trespasser." The twins began to cry inside the house, and Nokomis felt shame rise like a flood, ready to drown her. She stepped forward, ready to take her children and walk away once more. But before she could, Magnus strode past her, his voice ringing clear. "She is my wife, and this is her home." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nokomis froze, her heart pounding. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Her gaze locked with his, and in his steady eyes she saw no pity, no half-truth, only a question, a choice offered in front of the world. Her breath caught, and for a moment she could not move. Then, trembling, she stepped to his side, dignity blooming in her chest like the flowers she had planted. The sheriff, beaten by the force of Magnus' conviction, muttered and rode off. The crowd dispersed, murmuring, but Nokomis no longer cared what they said. That night the garden shimmered in moonlight. The twins slept soundly, their small breaths rising and falling. Nokomis sat on the porch with Magnus, the air smelling of earth and blossoms. She whispered, "This is the first time the world has felt kind to me." He did not answer with words, only took her hand, calloused, strong, steady. The silence was enough. The breeze stirred the flowers she had planted, their petals trembling as though in blessing. And if an old soul were to tell you this tale, they would lean close and whisper, "Homes are not built of wood and stone alone. They are made when two souls, battered by storms, choose one another against the world." Remember this: love is not loud. It does not shout from rooftops. It is steady, quiet, like roots gripping the soil, holding fast no matter how the wind rages. And in that steadiness we find not just shelter, but belonging.